the institution, Instituto Superior de Agronomia, and I would like to welcome everybody to this last meeting of the project REMAS, Greenhouse Gases Emission Risk Management in Forest Fires. I'm sure it will be a good morning here, sharing knowledge and the results of this project in this last meeting. I will be with you during part of the morning. I'm also part of the project. I'm not only representing the institution, but I have classes before, so I will leave you a little early.
Thank you, Nuno. Good morning. I welcome everybody to Lisbon, to ISA, for the final meeting of REMAS. So I am representing with Francisco Rego, the local coordination of the project, and I'm sure we will have a fruitful meeting today with knowledge sharing, and so I wish everybody a good meeting, and I welcome you again, and I will pass now the micro to Francisco, who was the former coordinator before me, but now he retired.
Good morning again. Just to say how pleased I am to be here in this project that I started coordinating locally, and then Vanda took the place, and I think it's quite it's a very interesting project, and especially I would like to just have a kind of a personal word. Because, well, I'm now retired for 1 year, but following the project and this project also. And I've been very much associated with this place. Tapada da Ajuda. I think you probably will have the possibility to visit a little bit, even if the weather is not... well, there is something wrong. Okay. Just a personal word. I know this area since I was 2 years old, so I visit. It was the place where I was visiting and walking. I have pictures from this area when I was really small, and the trees were small, so it's very interesting. And then I made my coursework, forestry degree year. Then I went to Vila Real, to the university there, and I came back as a professor, and then I was for a while the dean of this school. So I'm very much attached to this place, not only this physical building, but also the area around. And if you have a chance to look around and see our Center of Applied Ecology, which is also a very nice small facility, it would be nice if the weather allows. And so it's just to say that it's a pleasure, and I hope that once you are retired, you will maintain also the same interest in the forestry research as I have now, because I think it's something that is attached to you, and even after being formally retired, I think the interest in forestry, the interest in forest fire research, the interest in emissions continues, and so it's a personal pleasure to have everybody around, old friends and new friends, and thank you very much to be here and to allow me also to participate in this session. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm Rebecca. I'm the project coordinator of the REMAS project, and I want to say here thank you for ISA to organize the final communication event. It has been a pleasure to end the project in this, as we are here. And well, I'm from the Association of Forest Municipalities of the Comunitat Valenciana, AMU4, and as project coordinator, I'm representing the association. And I want to say as project coordinator that the project can't work without a good team, engaged team. And I think the REMAS project has had the opportunity to work with a very, very, very engaged team, very competent team. I'm very happy since we started the project, not in 2019 before, when we were working on the proposal. Also, I feel the, how do you say that? I would say again, the engagement. No, but I was looking for another word. I want to say that this has been a pleasure to coordinate a project like REMAS, and the project has succeed with thanks to the REMAS team. So thank you so much. I hope that participants that you are online, also that the participants who are here in person, enjoy our results that have been worked during 3 years. And from my side, I think we have obtained very, 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 very competent results. The project was very ambitious, and we have finished this period because we hope that we can continue with the studies of the REMAS. We have finished this period, but with a very, very innovative result that after responsible will introduce you. And well, thank you so much for being here. And thank you, Isa, again for the organization. Thank you, each entity, each person that has contributed to the project. And well, it has been a pleasure to coordinate REMAS. Thank you so much. So now we are going to start with the thematic presentation. So Victoria Lerma of the University Polytechnic of Valencia will start. Yes. And after we will continue with, I will introduce the other speakers after. So.
Well, while we are waiting for the presentation, I will introduce myself. First of all, good morning to everyone. I'm Victoria Lerma. I belong to the Polytechnical University of Valencia. I'm here representing the scientific coordination of the project, but I have to say that it has been a shared task by all partners. And I want to thank all of them for this. Because like this, it has been easier than it should have been. And now I will start presenting some of our results. I will talk about the action protocol and the emission risk model that we have developed in the project. So yes, I have to, to pass myself. Okay. So this is one of our main results that is the action protocol. And this is an action protocol that aims to provide a common criteria and methods to quantify and map the emission risk. Emission risk is a greenhouse gas emission risk in a case of a forest fire event. And what we wanted to do is first to map and quantify this risk, and later to provide like support to decision makers on landscape planning and forest management to know which practices are the ones who are mitigating more the emission risk in the landscapes. So this action protocol is presented as a decision support system, as I told you, that has like 3 steps. The first step was to know how to assess the risk of greenhouse gas emission from forest fires. This is to quantify and map what is this emission risk. The second step was to know, okay, now we know which are the hotspots in terms of emission risk. Then what do we do in these hotspots? What can we do? Then we identified the areas and thought about mitigation practices that could help to reduce this risk. And the third step was, from all these practices, which are the best ones to mitigate the risk. So in an infography, this would be the steps, the 3 steps. I will start for the first one, the assessment and mapping of the greenhouse gas emission risk. And to do this first, and that took us a long time, was to first to define the emission risk concept that for us, and I think that for the community, the scientific community, was not defined as it up to now. And this is the probability of greenhouse gas emission risk from vegetation and soils as a consequence of a fire event. And then the second key concept was vulnerability to emissions. So this is the degree of sudden loss of carbon stored in an ecosystem that can be released in a fire event. So from the definition of the concept, we passed to the elaboration of a model to determine and quantify what is this risk. So the objective is to identify and map the areas in a region with higher potential of emissions. So we took a formula provided by Rego and Colasao. So emission risk is hazard per damage. The hazard is the probability of a fire event. So the probability that we have the hazard of having the burn of the landscape. And the second term is the damage. And damage is composed on one hand by the value at risk that is in damage, that in our case is the carbon storage, and the emission vulnerability, that, as I defined, is the potential loss of carbon. And it is defined by intrinsic characteristics of the landscape or the forest territory, and depends on the fire severity, the potential fire severity that a fire could have, and also the potential fire resistance that the landscape, due to the intrinsic characteristics, infrastructures, silviculture measures that have been applied, mosaic disposition of different fuel models, etc. has. Okay, so with these 2 terms, we elaborated the model with variables that we could cartograph, we could locate in a map. We try to use always the data that is available, because our aim is not just to develop this model, is that every region that wants to implement this model can do it, or at least can try it with the information that is available. So this is the model in general terms, composed by 2 variables, hazard and damage. Damage is composed by value at risk and emission vulnerability. And emission vulnerability composed by the fire resistance and potential fire severity of the fire. And each of these variables are composed by sub-variables, such as full models, the slope of for example, in terms of topography, the slope and orientation of the territory, the spatial heterogeneity, so the landscape diversity, etc. So after implementing the model, what we have is 3 levels of emission risk. First level is low, second moderate, and the third is the high level, what we call hotspots of emission risks. And we decide to focus, we think that we have to focus the intervention measures in these high spot areas. Also in moderate, but of course the priority is for the high spots of emissions. So once we have identified the areas of intervention, this is a result, for example, from the Natural Park of Alto Tajo in Guadalajara, Spain. And as you can see, it's a map that we only apply this model for forest areas. We didn't apply it in agricultural landscape. So it's a further step that we would like to do in the future, but it is restricted to forest. So we consider these hotspots to be priority areas for intervention. And with this, what we developed also is a cartographic viewer. I don't know very well how we can please accede. You have it in the REMAS webpage, and there you can see for the 4 regions participating in the project. So it is this land Aquitaine in France, Algarve here in Portugal, Cerrado Caldorao, then Guadalajara, Alto Tajo Natural Park, and then in our region, Valencian community, a forest district called Selva Forest District. And if I may show you, I don't know if it's possible.
Yes.
There is a link in the...
Yes, we have to include the link, but wait a moment. We are going to say the...
Yes.
At the screen. ¿Cómo puedo compartir esta pantalla?
Or maybe... Presentación y le das al... Yes, we are not speaking now, so maybe because of that you cannot hear us. Okay, we try to make it work. Maybe I can continue the presentation, and if later we can see it, I will explain how we implemented it. Then, yes, it's me. Sorry, I'm not used to. No, no están tocando, creo. Tu puntero. Ahora, Vicky. Okay. After we got the map, what we consider that is necessary is not only rely on the map results, if not to check it with the local community, with the stakeholders, with the local and regional government administration, to check that the results are consistent with the reality of the territory. So this would be the next step. And then for these hotspots and for all the territory, but especially for this, we asked ourselves, what can we do to reduce this risk to high, to moderate, or low? So for this, sorry, I cannot follow. No sé, es que no puedo avanzar. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so how can we reduce this risk? We thought about management practices that can reduce this risk and modify the variables that affect the level of the risk. So we conclude that fuel management is the main type of intervention, to reduce the fire spread and fire severity, and maintaining a reduced fuel load and breaking the continuity of these fuels horizontally and vertically, we can obtain a lower risk. So what we did is to analyze these fuel practices. The main fuel practices were pre-commercial thinnings, coppicing, understory removal, prescribed burnings, targeted grazing, pruning, residues management, and of course also we included the existing infrastructures, or the infrastructures if they are not existing, but that can help to the extinction and also to the prevention. So we took 4 steps to rank these practices. The first is to quantify how much these practices can reduce the emission risk according to their impact on risk mitigation. The second step was to compare these practices with the cost of the practices, because for us it's also important to be realistic. So if we have the best practices but we don't have money to implement this, then it makes no sense to provide a protocol that we cannot follow. So what we did is to rank the practices according to the risk impact and also to the cost of the practices, to know which are more cost effective in terms of cost and also mitigation impact. And the third step was the application of a decision tree to decide in an area which is the more efficient practice. And the latest step is to evaluate the results with the technicians, with the forest managers or decision makers. So for the qualitative ranking of the fuel management, we did a ranking of all the fuel practices, and what we evaluate was the impact on site variables of the forest stand or the territory of the landscape that were directly affecting the emission risk. So for example, surface fuel load or ladder fuels, fuel horizontal continuity, the canopy base height, so how high is the canopy of the trees, the tree-layer structure, so if we have tree vertical continuity, if it is mono or multi-layer, the stand species heterogeneity, and also, these were the main variables for which we analyze each intervention action. So after a consult with the experts, we elaborate a final ranking, and what we obtained was this type of graph where we can see 2 things. On one axis, this has no. We have the unity cost of intervention practice here. And then we have also the reduction emission risk. So we got 4 quadrants. The first quadrant, low cost, high reduction of impact of emission risk. Here we found understory removal and pre-commercial thinning that were the most suitable practices. Then we had a second quadrant in which, or this middle that are practices that have a high impact in terms of emission risk in this quadrant here, but also a high cost, and in the opposite, low impact but low cost. So this was our second option. And then we found no practices in the very high cost and very low emission risk, because of course we already selected the practices that we consider that had an impact on the fuel, on the emission risk. So with this information, the almost last step was to build a decision tree in which we try to how to say, to guide the selection of the best practice, trying to guide it to the most efficient practice, and then to the rest of the practices. But of course, always starting from the reality of the forest stand. So like this, we have an emission risk where this prioritization is guiding the questions that we made in the decision trees. So the first question was, for example, is there a very dense shrub layer and vertical continuity? Yes or no? If yes, if there is shrubs, then do we have a tiny budget for intervention? Yes or no? If we have a tiny budget, then we move to the next question, that is, if we have a livestock herd in the area, so we can use targeted grazing. If it is so, we apply targeted grazing as the most favorable, suitable intervention, okay? And if not, then we think about understory removal. That would be the second option. If we don't have, for example, a tiny budget, then we move to consider also social constraints, like if there are social pressure that impedes us to apply prescribed burning, yes or no? If there is no, prescribed burning is the most suitable management practice. If yes, then maybe we should think about other option that would be, again, to check if we have a livestock herd in the area, so we can make targeted grazing. And so we constructed the decision tree. If you have any doubt or whatever, you can ask me later or by mail, and I will try to explain it. So the last step was, after this result, of course, to check the management practice with the local stakeholders, the regional stakeholders, for them to validate the option according with the local conditions. So, because we think it's important to identify the conflicts that may have in the area, or trade-offs or synergies. So this is the work that we did for the action protocol that incorporate the emission risk model and the visor. And here are some references and some publications that have came out of the project and on which we are still working. So thank you very much for your attention, and any question, please don't hesitate to ask me. Thank you very much.
We are going to try to show the visor, the cartographic viewer. So can we try to show it now? Okay. So thank you, Vicky. I want that you also stay here because I want that you show
we can see it. Okay.
Okay. Like you
should close the presentation.
Okay.
First.
If not, you, the ones who are online, you can try it by yourselves, just with the link. or in the web, in the REMAS web page, it is also the link to the cartography viewer. Okay, great. That is the Iberian Peninsula. Okay, here we have the cartography viewer, and then in the upper part we have three windows or possibilities. That is region, the regions of study. This project has been studied in the Selva for Valencian community, Lands de Gascogne, France, Alto Tajo, Guadalajara, Cerrado Caldorao. You can select one. Rebecca, please, you can select. Yes, and then the year that we want to analyze. We apply the emission risk model to the present year, what in this case was 2020 when we developed it, and also an important year when we had a big fire. In the case of Lands de Gascogne was 2015. So we can see for 2015, which was the emission risk. For example, we choose the emission risk or other variables, and we click submit, and we can see how was the risk before that fire took place. So we can see in which areas the risk was higher. Okay, so we did the same for the 2020. You can put it there, please, for Lands de Gascogne also. And what we saw recently this year is that they suffered also an important fire. And the fire, can you submit it again, please? The risk didn't change too much because only 5 years have passed, so it's not. But what we observed is that in the red spots, this last year fire took place mainly in that areas. Of course, we are not saying that this has more fire risk, if not emission risk. So we cannot check it with a reality that because we have not measured emissions, but in terms of emission, we can see that. And yes, for Cerrado Caldorao, to put the example from here, from Portugal, there. You can also check, we have several years, also important fires took place. Here we have Loulé with our colleagues from Loulé. And we have here 3 years, 2004, 2012, and 20. And we can check the different fire risk that, of course, when a fire takes place, the risk later is reduced because there is less fuel to release carbon. So yes, you can play and check the different variables that are composing the emission risk. Yeah. So the variable, for example, value at risk is the carbon stocks. So, and the other emission vulnerability or hazard, probability of fire occurrence, etc. So I think that I will not take more time from you, but that is. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vicky. So now we are going to continue with the presentation of carbon stock estimation and monitoring across pilot areas. So please, for ISA team. What is? No, there is no. If you have any question, please include to the chat. We can after each presentation we can solve a question if you have, or if not, at the end of the working thematic presentation. So now Justine is going to introduce that thematic here. Yes, you can start now.
sorry. Okay, good morning, everyone. I would like to introduce myself. My name is Yassin Ben Halim. I am a PhD student, and I am a scholarship under the. Okay, just for the. Sorry.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Wait up. Can you please, online people can see the presentation? Because I have read a comment. Please, can you confirm it, please? It's
Yeah. No. Okay. Can you hear me? Huh? From here? Here. Okay. No. Yeah. Good morning, everyone. My name is Yassin Ben Halim. I am a PhD student in the scholarship holder under the REMAS project. And I am fortunate to present today the working package, the activity 2.5 under the REMAS project. Well, starting with the content, we will speak today about the carbon monitoring that was done in 4 different regions. With respect to the management actions that was suggested on the earlier work, and we will try to lead you through the study areas and methodology, and what we could have as a results, and what we could conclude according to the limitations of the data and the availability. Here we can speak generally that carbon stock resides in 2 pools, the above ground and the below ground. And it's a more like a complex process that involves many factors. So in the terms of speaking about carbon sequestration, we cannot draw conclusions if we don't follow the whole processes from above ground to below ground and vice versa. This is why maybe we choose the holistic approach, so we can understand exactly the carbon sequestration, the effect of management actions on the carbon stock, whether in the below or the ground, below or above ground pools. Yeah. The study took place in 4 different representative regions across the Mediterranean, where they had different high economical and ecological values, and they were subject to severe wildfires in different years. More importantly, we can see here that mostly in Spain we have pinus forests with the interest of management for wood production, and in France we see Pinus pinaster also as a species forest ecosystem with the interest of wood production. And in our case, in Serra do Caldeirão, Cacusubri is mostly known about the cork production, and it's more of a high importance for the region and the country. The methodology took place. The methodology that we choose is to monitor the carbon in vegetation and soil on all the compartments for 18 months. Taking sampling is 6 months. We tried to work for example, in the case of France, Chelva and Chiquilla, we tried to divide the plots into 5 each, 5 as a control, the ideal scenario and burned. The other one is the burned ones, and then try to look for the 2 other 5 and apply management actions. In the case of Portugal, we tried to have a slightly different direction. It was of interest to understand the effect of repetitive conventional management actions along 2 fire periods, whether 16 years and 10 years and 18 years after fire, with respect to unburned plots. And in this case, we try to speak about only trees, shrubs, and litter, and soil organic carbon stock, and just to ease for the whole community. And in case for any more interest in other carbon forms, please, you can refer to the whole team so you can have more information. In Serra do Caldeirão, we try to apply continuous shrub clearing, and as we can see here, prescribed burning was done. It's a low intensity fire, and we try to take We try to take measurements mainly for the carbon soil, mainly carbon organic and label form, 1 month after 1 month and 18 months after the fire. So it's 1 month after the fire and 1 year and a half after the fire. In the case of Chelva, Spain, we tried, in the scope of the project, a pre-commercial thinning was applied in the unburned areas, along with while in the burned areas, a shrub clearing with mastication was applied. And here we can see in this experimental station, an experimental fire was applied. It was classified as a low to moderate. And afterward, mulching was applied on the study area that were burned. So here, for example, in the case of Chiquilla, Spain, shrub clearing was applied. And also here in Land de Gascon in France. Here we can see in the graph the carbon stock distribution in different pools. We choose mainly above ground and below ground for the unburned and burned areas. As we can see here, the most important total carbon was in Land de Gascon, followed by Chiquilla and Chelva, and it resides mainly in the above ground pool. Whether for the case of Serra de Caldera, we can see like nearly equally similar amounts of between the above and below ground pools, and the total carbon was the lowest. In the second graph, we can see here that the fire mainly redistributed, induced several changes in the ecosystems. In the case of Pinus ecosystems, Land de Gascon, Chiquilla, Chelva, we see a gradual decrease, a significant decrease, whether it manifested mainly in the above ground carbon pool. And we see here in the case of Chiquilla and Chelva, we had an increase in the below ground carbon pool. Whether in the case of Serra de Caldera, fire increased the total carbon stock, and mainly in the above ground pool, and also we can see here also an increase was observed in the below ground. Here we try to showcase the results of the monitoring that was done on the period of the study. We can see here on the trees, higher carbon stock was observed mainly on the 2004 plots, followed by the unburned ones, and they maintained the steady state. Whether for the 2012 fire, we see that lowest carbon stock was registered, and a significant increase was observed along the study monitoring. In the case of shrubs, you see here the highest shrub carbon stock was observed in 2012 fire, and decreased gradually, reaching lower values pretty similar to the unburned ones. Whether for the two other scenarios, we see more or less stable trend. Conversely, for the liter, a higher liter was observed on the 2004 fires, and rather than the 2012 and then burned ones, and all scenarios showed more or less a decrease. In the soil, we can see here that burned areas has more carbon stock than unburned ones, and they were stable along the study period. Here we can, the main thing that maybe we can conclude is the burned areas has more carbon stock in general than unburned ones, and it manifests heavily in the shrubs. And the clearing may induce some improvement in the carbon stock in trees, maybe due to on-site conditions that will change. So here we move to Chiquilla. We see that the restoration management applied here was shrub clearing, and we see an increase in carbon stock in trees. Whether we see that it manifests, the carbon stock manifests mainly in litter and shrubs. There is a contradictory trend. We see unburned plots has a higher litter, and the lower shrubs. Whether for the burned ones, we have a higher shrub carbon stock and lower litter. Here we can see in the burned, the restoration management in orange, that management applies in shrub showed more or less a trend that according to the variation is stable. So it was a decrease followed by an increase along the monitoring period. Whether and also maintain the value more or less stable near the burned carbon stock. Whether for the case of litter, we see here, the burned with restoration management has a more amount than the burned one and maintained the same trend as the burned one with the stable trend. And the soil, we see along the study period, and burned plots had an increased carbon stock, while the burned ones was decreasing. The plots that had restoration management followed the same trend and decreased. We can highlight here that shrub clearing had a temporary effect, and along the monitoring, we can see that it showed a recovery in the shrubs, and it didn't influence that much the soil organic carbon stock. Here in Chelva, Spain, the management actions were applied are pre-commercial thinning on the trees and in the shrubs clearing, and on the litter mulching. We can see here that the trees increased by a significant amount, and for the shrubs, we see that the burnt areas had mainly the higher shrub carbon stock, whether in the litter they had quasi-null litter carbon content. On the other hand, unburnt plots had lower shrubs and higher litter, and manifest mainly by a seasonal change, but overall it decreased. Restoration management applied had a higher effect on carbon stock in shrubs, where we can see that we have a high null value that was maintained along the study period. And for the restoration management applied for the mastication, we see an increase in the litter on after applying it, reaching more or less with the same trend as the unburned ones, followed by a decrease. This manifests also in the soils, where we can see that burned with restoration measures had a decrease and followed by an increase just in this small period, and then maintained stable. But overall, it had more soil organic carbon stock than the burned areas. Here we can say that management actions applied was effective in terms of carbon as we are speaking about shrub clearing, because it maintained the carbon content near low values, stable. And for the trees, we see pre-commercial thinning increased significantly the carbon stock in trees, and that may lowered the litter carbon stock. We are not sure about it. And the provision of litter provision of the litter by mastication improved, made this disturbance in the soil organic carbon stock and improved it more than the burned state. Here, for the case of France, we see that trees in the unburned plots also increased along the study monitoring, where for the case of shrubs, we had also higher shrubs in the burned areas with the near null values in the litter. Whether for the unburned ones, they behaved on the contrary. We see here less shrubs less shrub carbon stock in the unburned ones and higher litter. Restoration management applied appears to reduce the carbon content in the shrubs for the first period, and afterward it increased more than the initial state and maintained stable just in just 1 year between 2 seasons. And for the litter, we see that the carbon content was more or less maintained stable according to the variation that we have. And for the burned with the restoration management, it maintained the same trend as the burned ones. But for the soil, we see an increase in the carbon stock in the areas that was where we applied the restoration management. along the study monitoring, and this increase was even more than the unburned plots. So we conclude maybe here that the shrub clearing didn't have much, has increased the carbon stock. It didn't have that much of effect. It didn't maintain the carbon stock low. This is maybe because of the nature of the vegetation that can grow rapidly. But we see like this affected the soil directly by increasing its carbon stock. Here we can show the case of prescribed burning results in Chelva. There were no significant change also in the soil organic carbon concentration and hot water soluble carbon. And it was highlighted also that it was of an interest here to study the effect of frequent fires. So, those plots were burned before, and after applying this fire also, we didn't see any changes. So this maybe would be a good effective solution. As it can maybe take off the vegetation, but it doesn't make any harm on the soil organic carbon. With respect, with those areas burned, was applied also mulching. We can see here the runoff production. The water volume in this time period was of 500 milliliters, and the burned areas with mulching preserved the loss of organic carbon stock. As we can see here, burned with mulching, we could preserve more approximate amount of 6 kilos than the areas burned, and burned ones didn't show any loss of organic carbon. It was nearly negligible. Here we see the effect of prescribed burning on soils in Serra de Calderão. We can see in green the unburned plots and the prescribed burning with the collection of the data 1 month and 18 months. In the soil organic carbon, we didn't see any significant changes, and the range was nearly evaluated similar, but we see that after 1 month, soil organic carbon increased, and that was followed by an increase after 18 months. This is also something that was more or less a limitation, let's say, because we took soil organic carbon concentrations in different seasons. So this maybe induced this kind of change. The one we took in month was in June, and the other one was in October. But in the case of hot water, soluble carbon, we see a significant reduction after 18 months. This is maybe due to the changes in the vegetation, and subsequently it will affect directly the carbon label fire. So we try, as a conclusion, we can say that the fire affected the carbon pools in many stages. So it can reduce a abrupt change, a loss of time, and then the alteration will continue forward as more as it stays more without intervention and with more frequent fire. But this was very different about the regions. And the most important thing is like fire redistribute the above ground carbon pool in between the shrubs and the litter, favoring sometimes the shrubs than the trees, and vice versa. The burnt areas may present also an important carbon stock pool that we have seen earlier. In the case of the cork oak region, and also Serra de Calderão, and also for Chiquilla and Chelva. Maybe this increase was in the below ground carbon. Management practices that we have applied them may protect against carbon emission, but by enhancing the sequestration capacity, as we have seen in the case of unburned areas, we have applied pre-commercial thinning, and it increased carbon stock in those trees, and showed lower liter carbon stock. Maybe this can reduce the rate of spread in case of fire, and subsequently preserve the carbon in the trees. Shrubs may constitute also a higher stratum of carbon stock, but clearing may be effective or not, and it depends according to the regions and also the composition. And prescribed fire was a good practice to prevent higher carbon emission, but the drawback was mainly the soil runoff or erosion, and that could be prevented by using the carbon, using the mulching from the shrubs that were cleaned. And according to the variation that they have seen about the samplings, we could suggest that more studies need to be done along the more long time periods to understand the interactions between those pools and also with those management actions. Thank you.
Thank you, Yassine. You can stay here if you
case of
want,
any
because we are
questions.
going to ask participants in that you are online and also participants that you are here in the room. If you have any questions, also if you have any question of the other presentation that Vicky done. So could you please put the conclusion slide again? Okay, yes. So I am going to include the presentation of the conclusion so you can see it again. And I take advantage also, if you have any question, Banda has one.
Yes, thank you, Yassine. In your last slide, you say that the carbon stock is higher in burned areas than in unburned, mainly in the BCG. What is the BCG?
Below ground carbon.
Okay,
Yeah,
can you
speaking
explain
of-
why?
yeah.
Can you explain why?
Maybe because of repetitive fires that were done will give more higher ash and sediments, and also because of for the mechanism of maybe increasing shrubs, this will make a higher incorporation of this to the below ground carbon, but thus will stabilize. But this kind of behavior can be seen maybe a longer time period rather than shorter time, maybe 2 years or something. Yeah.
That is a limitation, the study we did, because it was a short term and we should have a longer
The
term.
limitation that we can see here, that in the Mediterranean region here, we can see that we have a higher variability, and also since this process of carbon sequestration is involved in many interactions, I think due to those, we should suggest that we could have more pilot studies in some plots with more time to measure the carbon sequestration. Another thing also to highlight is like the conventional methods that they are applied in each regions are different. So this is another thing also to take into consideration, that it would be good to take to know the stakeholders' interests, and also to maintain some pilot plots and to understand what's happening in depth, to have more also data to shrink the variability so we can understand what's happening exactly. Thank you. Any other questions?
They are online. Do you have any question here? So if not, we are going to continue with 2 more presentation. Thank you, Yassine, for this summary of all the studies done. So thank you so much. Here in this morning, we are compiling all results in very short and synthetic presentation. But after you have all the results in the website. Here now we are going to continue with Stéphanie Jalabert of Bordeaux Sciences Agro, France, and she will explain us the capitation and transfer done in the REMAS project. So 1 minute, and I share the presentation.
Hello everyone, I hope you hear me well. So I introduce myself. I'm Stéphanie Jalabert from Bordeaux Sciences Agro. I'm a soil engineer, and I'm very pleased today to present the capitalization and transfer we made during the REMAS project. So I'm going to present our knowledge, how we capitalize and how we transfer our knowledge, experience, results through a couple of supports that can remain over time, even after the project. So that kind of support can be technical and scientific communication, training courses, or even a tool developed during the project, a platform online for work collaboration. So first of all, to remind you, what about the technical scientific communication? Remind that the project began on October 2019, and during the first year and a half, the REMAS team needed to harmonize methods, choose pilot sites, make field survey, collect data, and analyze the first results. So the scientific communication really began in the middle of 2021 with a couple of international conferences like Geological and Environmental Sustainability Congress, or the EGU General Assembly, so the European Geosciences Union General Assembly, and also at the end of the year, the Congress about fires on Earth system. So it was a good attendance at an international level. And you can see also this year, in the middle of the year, we also were present on the EGU General Assembly on soil carbon evolution and remote sensing issues. So on the bottom of the slide, you can see in green also regional or national conferences, such as in Portugal with the annual meeting for soil sciences last year, and this year we get the big Spanish forestry congress, and also a regional one in Valencia. And in the meantime, we published 2 papers in peer-reviewed journals. So here are more details about that papers. The first one is about the potential analysis of forestry to offset emission at a regional scale, with the example of Valencia. And the second one, it's about the assessment of the forest ecosystem biomass by remote sensing, published in the journal Forests. But we submitted also another article this year about our model we developed during the project on the journal Fire. So it will be published next year. And we have also in preparation 2 publications. So a book online, an e-book based on one of the REMAS deliverables about the good practices to mitigate GHG emissions due to forest fires, and also a French article in a forestry journal based on the impact of the large wildfires which took place in Gironde this summer. So now, on the other hand, so I talked about scientific communication, but also REMAS team organized training courses. So the first one is at a regional scale on Spanish, and the second one with an international audience. So the first one was organized by the Diputación of Valencia, and it took place, or was organized by the Training Service Learning Community, and it lasted 2 weeks on October this year. So it was divided in 7 thematic units, from the presentation of the project to the explanation of the strategies, to include our emission risk model inside laws, legislation, or planification. And you can find all the topics, all the issues dealt inside the project. So it represented 30 teaching hours in 6 face-to-face sessions, managed by a team of almost 6 teachers belonged of the REMAS team. So we got 28 participants, mainly from local administration, 1 from a national entity, the Spanish National Research Council, 1 from the Ministry of Defense, and the last one from the Autonomous Community of Valencia. So there were firefighters mainly, environmental technicians, and agricultural or forestry engineers. So the course, the training course in Valencia, was very appreciated. As you can see on the screen, the overall satisfaction is very good. And that course, you can have a certificate of participation and is approved by several entities, as the Valencian Institute of Public Administration or the Education Council, or even the Valencian Institute of Public Safety and Emergency, especially for firefighters. So the international course now, it's based on the same framework of the previous course I talked about. So the same thematic units, etc. But it's in English, it was online, and it was a self-guided courses. It lasted 2 weeks on November and December this year. And it was, there was a tool, a teacher support for students or for participants through a forum if there are some difficulties or some questions. And you can have also a certificate of participation if you complete the course and if you complete also the satisfaction survey. So we got 74 participants, so a good attendance, and we can find a large variety of professions, forester, researchers, students, officers, mayors, etc. So the both courses I talk about showed a real great interest of REMAS, and even it fulfills many expectations in a couple of professions, in fire prevention or in forest management. So now, to end my presentation, I'm going to talk about the tool developed during the project, the platform for work coordination, particularly used by the working groups consolidating during the project. So that's what I said. It was mainly used for activities in REMAS regional working groups. Just I remember the objective of these working groups. Experts or entities from that working groups wanted to define a strategy to include the emission risk due to forest fires inside legislation or public policies. And to do that, first, each partner in a REMAS project organized general meetings with several entities to present the project. And after that meetings, we were able to choose or to invite experts to enter in our working groups. And the conclusions of that working groups will be presented just after me by Ricardo from INEA. So I will let the floor to Ricardo. So as you can imagine, the platform was like a tool for the working groups to give an information interchange, a collaborative work. And the platform is hosted by AMUFOR website. So I will show you how it looks like. So there you have the page, the first page of AMUFOR website, and you can find all the projects in which AMUFOR is working. So the first one, Interreg Sudway REMAS, and you have 4 associated pages with the results of the project, the training course I was talking about just before, the cartographic viewer, the map viewer, Vicky told you about that, and the platform known as REMAS Partners Access, because the platform has a protected access. So you can find 4 working groups, the Spanish one, French, Portuguese one, and the last one is the transnational working group. So every working group has a protected access with the password, and I take just the example for ours from France. So when you enter in the platform, it's like a cloud, you know, it's a unique SharePoint. You can create files, share documents, upload, download documents, and you can also edit online. So that's a good way to collaborate with all your experts, stakeholders, and from the working groups. And we propose a central and unique SharePoint to work. So as you can see on the screen, you can find, for example, for the French working group, our roadmap to define the strategy to include our emission risk inside public policies. So I almost finished, just I made a summary about capitalization and transfer. So REMAS team participated in conferences quite very well. So 5 in international levels, 3 at national ones. We published 2 papers in peer-reviewed journals, 1 submitted for next year, and also we planned 2 other publications. We organized training courses, regional one in Spanish and international one, and it's repeatable if people require them. So don't hesitate to contact us. It's possible to repeat the training courses. And the platform is a SharePoint. It's available on the website, and it's necessary for collaborative work. So thank you for your attention, and all is capitalized on the website of AMUFOR can remain over time. And now, if you have questions, no problem, but I will let the floor to Ricardo for the inclusion of our emission risk into legislation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stephanie, for the presentation. Very clear. So now, if you have, do you have any questions about the capitalization and transfer here in the room? Yes.
Zoom, there's a person asking regarding the international course, how many participants were from Portugal? You said that in total it was 74, but have an idea how many were from Portugal?
No, I know. I can say a number of participants, but I'm not sure now. But more than 20 people, I think.
Okay,
but
so
I should check it to know,
okay.
to say to
more or less
the
20 people.
No.
Okay,
But I think
okay,
was
thank you.
more than 20. Also, I want to point out that we have created a platform in the AMUFOR website in order that we the results and all the information on the platform we continue after the project ends. So you have the information in the REMAS.com, and after all the information once the REMAS close is included also in AMUFOR. So thank you so much, and we are going to continue with Ricardo from Ricardo Ruiz Peinado, about the inclusion of greenhouse gas emission risk into planning and sustainable forest management strategies. So.
Okay. Good morning, everyone.
Ici une soupe de mâche. L'excellente là ce midi, je t'en prends une au passage?
Avec grand plaisir.
Ok, cool.
Tu vas au Schwetzia?
There is someone with the microphone open. Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Ricardo Ruiz from the INIAC from the Forest Science Institute. I'm going to present you the results of the final result of our project about the inclusion of the greenhouse gases emission risk into planning and sustainable forest management strategies. But at the first time, I would like to repeat you and in order that you could remind our result, for example, the development of a methodology for estimating the greenhouse gases emission risk for forest fires, with the development of a model and a cartography when we could know about the index, the risk index of these stands or these areas, and in order to apply some management guidelines. Also with the development of the action protocol to minimize greenhouse emission from forest fires, with the inclusion of a decision support system to select between those management guidelines the most important management practices for the mitigation of the risk, and also the result from our case studies in Portugal, France, and Spain about the development of the carbon stock in the different forest compartments, soil, in vegetation, and litter in deadwood. And also with our knowledge and about the carbon tendencies after fires and after some treatment that we applied in these areas. But finally, I think that we are now in a good way to know how to include the greenhouse gases emission risks in forest planning and forest management, because now we have the existing knowledge and research with not only with the partners on the REMAS project, but also from outside, and with the inclusion of the experience and knowledge of the stakeholders. And working together, I think that we have obtained good results on it. I'm going to present. The experience of the stakeholders has been very important, and we work together in working groups, and we were following this methodology in 4 steps. At the first step, we identify these main stakeholders, and we create these working groups. These working groups were created in each country. In these working groups, we carry out an analysis of the current situation about greenhouse gases emission risks from forest fires. With the work of these working groups, we obtained some conclusions to create a document. And finally, with this document, we could support the adoption of a common agreement to include these greenhouse gases emission risks in forest planning. We think that the best way to support this common agreement is by the signing of a memorandum of understanding that I present later. First, in the first step, we identify the main stakeholder for public administration, professional association, for non-governmental organization, private sectors, enterprise, landowners, university, research center, etc., with the topic the greenhouse gases emission from forest fire prevention, forest management, air quality, climate change, and others. To these stakeholders, we do a presentation of our first result on our objectives of the project in order to create a group of stakeholders or a working group of interested people in the greenhouse gases emission risk. With these groups, we carry out an analysis of the situation from the point of view of legislation, planning, procedures, and others, to obtain first a draft document on conclusions that was reviewed and discussed for everybody. And finally, we agreed a document that will support the memorandum of understanding. That is our final objective. This was a participative process, including those key institutions with competence in topic. That is the main point. We carry out at least 3 working meetings, one of presentation, second of to analyze the current situation and to work with it, and a third with the semi-final document in order to be reviewed and commented by everybody. The analysis was carried out by countries, and also we perform different approaches, and diverse results were obtained depending on the working group. About the results, as I say, the working groups were in each country. For example, in Portugal, the main objective was the analysis of national, regional, and local legislation about climate change, environment, terrestrial planning, forestry, and forest fire prevention. And the objective of the final document was a SWOT analysis with identification on the main strengths, weakness, opportunities, and threats. I'm going to present some main results, main ideas, because the complete document of result for all working groups are in the webpage of REMAS and also in the AMU4 webpage, and you could consult and read. About the strengths in the Portugal legislation, there are references to the importance of forests as carbon sinks, also to the importance of the adaptation of the forest to climate change, and also to the reduction on burned areas from forest fire, and also to the reduction of the greenhouse gases emissions from these fires. About the weaknesses, there is no data actually about greenhouse gases emission risk from forest fire, and as indicator, the burned area and the fire severity are used nowadays. And also the planning in a general way has no reference to greenhouse gases emission or little to climate change. But we have also opportunities because it is possible to improve these methodologies to estimate greenhouse gases emission risks from forest fire with the result of the REMAS project, and also the development of indicator of greenhouse gases emission risks. About the threats, there is a lack. I think this conclusion is common in the three countries. There is a lack of financing and coordination instrument between the different administration, local, national, regional, that make it difficult to apply common management tools. Well, the results in Spain, the objective was to analyze the 60 thematic legislation, but this case at national level. And we carry out with the support of external legal experts. We were working in the environmental assessment, integrated pollution prevention and control, land and urban rehabilitation, climate change and forestry as the main topics, in order to obtain a final document of conclusion as suggestions to the introduction of normative reform. We were looking for those weaknesses of the national legislation, or some points that we could include the greenhouse gases emission risk in order to be observed in this national legislation. Some main ideas, for example, on the environmental assessment, is that any strategic environmental assessment should include the risk of greenhouse gases emission from forest fires, or the action presented in this assessment must prevent, reduce, correct, and quantify the greenhouse gases emission risk from forest fires, and the studies must take into account the responsible authorities, the authorities with competence in this topic, about forest management, fire prevention, air quality, or climate change. About our suggestions about pollution prevention and control is that when forest fire reaches 6, those installations will require an integrated environmental authorization with existing measure to prevent and control the greenhouse gases emission risk, and that the responsible authorities should be informed when fire risk is expected. About soil and urban rehabilitation, that any action on land use should include a report with the risk of greenhouse gases emission from forest fires, as well as measures to prevent and control these emissions. About climate change, the forest management and planning should establish measures to contribute to fire prevention and enhance forests as carbon sinks. And also, very important, we think that subsidies and green bonds may be included to improve for carbon sequestration, and these bonds, these green bonds from the forest, should be marketable to recognize this important ecosystem service. And also the inclusion that the technical projects and contract with administration should include management practices to reduce greenhouse emission risk when it is possible. About forestry, that greenhouse gases emission risk from forest fire and also forest carbon sequestration should be reported in statistics that nowadays is not presented. Forest plans should include practices to reduce greenhouse gases emission risk from forest fires. Forest harvesting should minimize the risk of greenhouse gases emissions from forest fires. Proposal for action against climate change and greenhouse gases emission reduction should be favored, for example, with the inclusion of funds in order that this project have money for it, and also the establishment of market mechanisms to sell or buy this carbon from the forest. Because the main result. In France, for example, with the objective of identification of those legislation that was directly related to the REMAS projects and the REMAS results, the interdepartmental plan for the protection of forests against fires was identified, because in the 19 actions there is an aim to improve knowledge and management of forests into the context on climate change, and it is a subsection, 90C, that it is focused in the study of the CO2 emission due to forest fires. But there are other public policies that could use our results. For example, the National Low Carbon Strategy to achieve the carbon neutrality by 2050, or the low carbon level that it is more related to local projects. And very important in this working group, we identified that communicate the REMAS results, the greenhouse gas emission methodology, the cartography, the best practice guidelines, the action protocol with the decision support system, to identify public entities as the Regional Risk Observatory in France, or the National Forest Offices, for example, in the research and development section. And with this document of conclusion from the working groups, with the experience from the stakeholders, we thought that with the memorandum of understanding, it will be possible to improve our greenhouse gas emission risk in this planning, this legislation. We had the knowledge and expertise with the partners of REMAS project and stakeholders. We know about the current situation of the legislation, procedure, the main laws, and we have a conclusion document that was agreed for all the participants and that support this agreement. But we have to look for the clear involvement of those administration with competencies, with responsibilities in forest management, fire prevention, air quality, and climate change, by the signature of the Memorandum of Understanding to include greenhouse gas emission risk in planning and forest management. But what is a document, a Memorandum of Understanding? It's a document including a declaration of intentions between the signatory parties. It's a document of political nature, not create binding obligation. This is very important because it's not, it's not a contract. And our target parties are the public administration with competency in the topic, in greenhouse gas emission, in competence in forest management, fire prevention, air quality, and climate change. But this memorandum of understanding will be supported by other public administration, private entities, landowners of non-governmental organizations. It could be supported by everybody. The scope of this memorandum of understanding is the cooperation between the signatures to promote the inclusion of greenhouse gas emission risks from forest fire in their respective field of work and territorial scope. This memorandum of understanding, the signature of the memorandum of understanding, have an initial duration of 2 years, but it could be extended for a period of 1 year if the parties are interested. And also, the signatory of this memorandum of understanding also agreed to participate in a platform for greenhouse gases emission risk management. That this is a platform at transnational level to collaborate and discuss about the adoption of greenhouse gases emission risk index that will be considering in fire prevention, forest management, and planning. And this is our main result, this memorandum of understanding in the conclusions from the working groups. If you have any question? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ricardo. for compiling the work that we have done in the framework of strategies to include emission risk in the planification and sustainable forest management strategies. I want to know if here from the public you have any question, because after we have now, after the questions, if you have, we have a coffee break, and after we will start the session to the round table. So if you have questions about the presentation that is responsible have done, it's time now. Also after you can also to write us in our email. But okay, there is a question here. Do you have
Yes, thank you. Thank you for all the presentation. That was all of them very, very interesting. And I have a question for Ricardo. This memorandum of understanding is addressed also to research entities, or just for administration?
Yeah, our target parties will be public administration with competences in forest management, fire prevention, but it could be supported by research organization, universities, but we think that our target is the public administration with competence that could include this index, this greenhouse gases emission risk index in their day-to-day work. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Because we think that it is very attractive for research, but our target, we will focus in this public administration with competence at local, regional, or national level.
Thank you, Ricardo.
Of course, research center in the case can see the memorandum and also join it. So it is addressed to more, as Ricardo said, to public administration, but also if you, for example, as a research center want to support it, just let us know, and we will send to you. Also, if people who are in the online, in Zoom or YouTube, if you want also to know more about this memorandum of understanding, you can write directly to coordinator, to us, and we will send to you. And also we have create a link in which you can register. You can make a meeting with the coordinator for that we explain you the main objective of the memorandum, as Ricardo said, and also how you can collaborate. So we are going to include here in the chat the link, and you can reserve a meeting with us. Thank you so much. If you have more questions, please let us know. So, well, I think we can make now the, okay, but
I just wanted to say that there are about 20 people online with us now watching this event, but there are no questions. But I think Francisco has a question.
Oh. Okay. Well, no. Well, I think it's, well no. Yeah. Well, it was just a question to Ricardo. I don't know if you can hear. It's okay now? Okay. Okay. Now, a question to Ricardo, because I think it's very important for the forest management and fire prevention to include these kind of questions and in their reasoning and in their planning. But I was wondering, at what level do you think it's more efficient? If it's the local level, the national level, or the European level? If there was any contact or any possibility of extending that to the European Commission, or having some kind of interest at that level that could trigger the different countries to follow a little bit that approach.
Sí, yes. Yes, I think that it should be the best, the better, to go from the up to down, from the European level, Union, national level, and then go to regional and local, because I think that will be the way to act. But also, if in a local level, for example, in one municipality, Lule, as our partner, or in others, it could be including this risk in the forest management. This is a good advance. They will be in a better way to know where they have to apply the management. For example, it's a criteria for selection, in order to not only to focus in the more, also in those areas that have more fire risk index, but also when it is more dangerous, for example, for the point of view of greenhouse gases emission risk. But now I think that we, for example, in Spain, we started with the study of the analysis of the national legislation, because this is the common of all Spain, of all the territory of Spain, and then we probably move down. But of course, it will be good if we could include this in the European legislation. Thank you.
And before the coffee break, I just want to show you the information that we have created in the REMAS project. So, okay. So, I don't know what's happened. Okay, perfect. So here we have created different products. These products are included in the different work groups. So the presentation that we have done now, there were 4 presentations. There were 4 presentations of 4 working groups. So this you can see here. You have also this information in the website, the different products that we have created, and also responsible has explained to us, and also the deliverables that we have created. So I wanted to show you that all this information will be in the website, and also in the REMAS website, and also in the AMU4 website. You can consult them, and if you have questions about deliverables and products and some tasks that we have developed and you want to know deeply, just you can contact us. So these were the 2 slides I want to show you before the coffee break. So thank you so much for this session 1, and we continue with session 2. Wanda, can you? No. Yes, the session 2. And in the session 2, I remind you that we will talk about the challenges and opportunities for the future, how to include greenhouse gas emission risk from forest fire into planning and legislation. So the moderator will be Wanda from ISA, and we have a keynote speaker, Paulo Canaveira, and he will talk about the REMAS result, national inventory of carbon emission and European policies. And after also we have 3 more experts. Mercedes Guijarro from INIA CSIC, also Mark Font of Andorra Research and Innovation, and Eduardo Rojas, which is who is the teacher also of the UPB. Banda will present deeply in the session too, but we have a very interesting session too. So we will see you after the coffee break, and thank you so much for experts to accept our invitation. Okay, the coffee break, 15, we have a break of 25 minutes, more or less, 25, 30 minutes. So
welcome back. We will now start session 2 of today's meeting. And this session will be a roundtable session with the first keynote presentation. So the session is entitled Challenges and Opportunities for the Future, how to include greenhouse gas emissions risk from forest fires into planning and legislation. So as I said, we'll have first a keynote speaker, which will present the subject that we'll be discussing, and he will launch the discussion. And then we'll have the roundtable session. For this session, we have 5 invited experts. So we'll have Paulo Canaveira, who we will present the first keynote presentation. And Paulo is a researcher at Instituto Superior Técnico, Universidade de Lisboa in Portugal. And he's a forest engineer, and he has a lot of experience, and he has been working on the national inventory of carbon emissions from Portugal and on climate change and land use change. And then we also have Francisco Castro Rego, who is part of our project and was here also. So I think everybody knows Francisco. He is a former professor at ISA. He's also an expert on the land use change, climate change, fire ecology. We'll have online 2 other experts, which is Eduardo Rojas, he's a professor at Universitat Politécnica de Valencia in Spain, and Mark Font, who is a researcher from Andorra Research and Innovation. And we will also have Mercedes Guijarro, who is here in the table with us. And Mercedes, she is the president of the Sociedade Española de Ciencias Forestales, and she's also a senior researcher at INIA. And I think then we'll go through a few questions for our experts, which I'll present after the presentation of Paulo. I will present the questions, and I will guide the session. So I think we can now ask Paulo to come.
Put on the presentation. Well, I'll start with thanking for the invitation to be here. I feel myself in a very awkward position, but Vanda made this to me, to try and talk about the topic where I'm not an expert on. So I have a bit of my personal background. I am a forester by training. Francisco was one of my teachers here in ISA, but I have since moved a little bit away from forestry in its strictest sense to work on climate change, and more particularly on climate change policies. I have been cooperating with the Portuguese Environment Agency, where I'm responsible for doing the national inventory on greenhouse gas emissions for land use change and forestry. But I've also cooperated with them in developing a number of climate policies. So I thought, so I thought it would be interesting to approach this session from that angle, where I'm more comfortable, rather than the more specific forestry policies. Just to say from that perspective that there is an Institute of Nature Conservation and Forestry that deals with forestry policies in particular, and there is also an agency here, which is working specifically on trying to develop policies for the question of forest fires. So I will approach this from that perspective. In terms of presentation outline, I will be looking at a number of questions to try and stimulate the question. The first one is a bit more technical, but I think it's important to set the scene for the rest. So how do we go about calculating emissions of forest fires in Portugal? To then show you the results of that, have a little bit of a discussion on why fire emissions are so irregular and sometimes so big. And then to go into the question of climate policies and how do they integrate and how do they relate to this question of forest fires. So the first question, as I said, is how are forest fires estimated? So just a little bit of background. Every single country, at least in Europe, has to produce an annual inventory of greenhouse gas emissions. This covers absolutely all sectors on which there are emissions resulting from human activities. And of course, that includes land use change. There's a bit of feedback. I don't know if there's an open mic somewhere. Another thing maybe interesting to know, so there is a specific format and the specific calculation methodologies that are defined and are relatively equal for all countries. But the idea is, but there's also a lot of flexibility for each country to adapt these general methodologies and guidelines to its own particular circumstances. And something that many people imagine that this inventory is resulting of large measurements of things. Most of the time, this is not the case because we don't have sensors in every single place, in every single activity. We don't have sensors, for instance, in our cars, in our domestic stoves, all that produces emissions. So we do that indirectly, and for that we need basically equations that we work with. In the case of fires, it's also one of those situations. We are not measuring, we don't have sensors on top of the fires to know how much carbon is being released. And so we go about with this type, this is the equation provided by the IPCC. Basically, we see how much area has burned, how much fuel is in those areas. The combustion factor is the percentage of carbon that we lose when the fire happens. And then that carbon releases several emissions. So how do we apply this in Portugal and what data sources we get and we have available to do this? In the case of area, we have annual maps that are produced by satellite imagery from ICNF. They have a minimum area of 5 hectares. They're produced every year. They only give a result of burnt, not burnt. So it's a 1-0 type of map. To be able to then calculate emissions, we need to know what type of land use is burning. So we do that by crossing this information with the land use maps from DGT, that's the mapping authority here in Portugal. We have maps for different years, but not for all the years. And we have about 20 land use classes that we work with, 8 of which are forests. The others are things like agriculture, pastures, settlements, and all those wetlands and all the different land uses that we can. This already introduces a number of uncertainties, especially because there's a lot of fires that are smaller than 5 hectares. That's already one of the issues. But also, we don't have land use. well, the land use maps have their own errors inherent to them, but apart from that, we don't have them for every year, so we have to interpolate and do all that type of approximations to what is burning. Then in terms of fuel biomass, the information comes from basically for forests from the National Forest Inventory. Again, we don't have it for every single year. We have, since 1990, we have 3, every 10 years being repeated. Then for other land uses, we need to get other sources that are not provided by the National Forest Inventory. Because biomass doesn't burn equally depending on size, so we have the leaves, the small branches, all that. We then try to separate the biomass for these different components. Of course, again, there are uncertainties here. For instance, in my calculations, every single pine forest is equal, every single oak forest is equal, and so we don't have this variability that we know exists in the territory, but this is, as I said, an approximation exercise. And the theory behind it is that on average, we won't be that wrong. But of course, if you want to know the specific emissions of a particular place, this can be very wrong. But on average, we hope it's not that bad. Combustion factor and emission factor, here we don't have absolutely no national no national data source for measuring this. Again, the combustion factor, we all know that not all fires are equal. So a fire under very bad conditions will have a higher combustion factor than a fire if the conditions are more wet and more with higher humidity and so on. And so, again, there are uncertainties here. We just to highlight also that we don't do this just for greenhouse gases. We do this for all sorts of atmospheric pollutants, and we calculate all this based on this information. So this is what we do with the difficulties of what we do. So what is, just to say, this is a very small, an important but small component of the overall calculation. So we also calculate sequestration, emissions from harvesting, and all emissions and removals from soil, and so on. So the end result of this exercise is what you see here on the screen. We have had an average net sequestration or net sink of about 4 million tons per year. But as you can see also from the graph, that goes up and down very erratically. We had in 2017, the sector was actually not a sequestration source, but an emission source. So it added to the rest of the emissions from the rest of the human activities. And that was about 21 million tons. And in the opposite direction, the highest sink happened in 2009 with about 10 million tons of CO2 equivalent. And so you may wonder, why is this going up and down this much? And the reason is very much here. So this is the extract of what is the fire emissions contained in the previous graph. And you see that there is an enormous interannual variability in fires. The highest emission was in 2017. We had an estimated 24 million tons of CO2 equivalent emitted in 2017, and the lowest was in 2008. And if you put on top the previous graph, you can clearly see the connection between the two exercises. Basically, everything else is relatively stable. So the amount of harvesting we do, the growth, that is changing much less every year than the large interannual variations that come from forest fires. And I think that makes a good link to the project here. What is making this change this much every year is basically weather patterns, specific weather patterns for the specific years. So it's not that land use is changing like that every year. it is changing, but it's a slow process. It's not that management is changing, so that in 1 year, or that in 1 year we don't have any firemen, and in the other year we have a lot of planes. That's not changing that much every year. What is changing a lot is the weather patterns. And so that brings me to my reflection, and just to note that this may be a simplification of the complexities of forest fires, but just for the sake of introducing the discussion later on. So I looked at the factors that affect fire intensity and fire size, and try to classify them into different classes, which were already present in the model that we saw presented this morning. So I hope I don't make any mistake on one hand, on the other hand, that this is not completely new for you. But of course, one of the main things that changes is the fuel load, and that is also linked to land use. So if we have forest land uses, we'll have more fuel than if we have an annual cropland, and that will have more biomass than if we consider a city, for instance. But also, it's not just the total amount of fuel, but also the architecture of that fuel. So how much of the fine fuels we have, and that may be different from land use to land use. Aspects of continuity. So is the fuel spread evenly in the territory, or are there patches with a lot of fuel and patches with less fuel, both horizontally and vertically? Then we have the characteristics of what I call the terrain, the location. These are not all equal. We know that higher slopes will tend to provide for bigger fires than if it's flat terrain. Different orientations. This has a correlation, of course, with weather. South tends to be drier and hotter, and so that tends to produce higher fires. But also, and as I said, weather is a very important aspect here. Not just the weather in the day of the fire, but the recent weather just before the fire. And of course, there's the human component of firefighting. Of course, if we are better, more equipped, more efficient, we will have smaller fires than if we are not. And then I try to characterize this as things where we have control and influence, and things we can't control. And I think this is important to then think about what we can do in terms of policies. Another aspect of seeing this is at the human scale, those aspects of terrain will not change. The weather is playing against us. We should expect worse weather and worse weather conditions in the future due to climate change. And so basically we really need to get it right on the things that we can control and change. And again, weather is the thing that is most responsible for this very large interannual variety. So how do climate change policies relate to forest fires? I like to make this distinction just in terms of conceptual, how we conceptualize climate policy. There's normally two large families of climate policies. When we talk about mitigation, we're talking about our, hopefully, capacity to control climate change. And we know climate change is driven by emissions. And so what can we do in terms of control of emissions, increasing sequestration, to make sure that we keep climate change under control? And that is normally called mitigation policies. And then we have what we call adaptation policies, which looks at climate change from the other angle. Is, okay, even if we could stop emissions altogether today, we would still have a changing climate. And what can we do to make life on Earth and all the economic systems continue to work and so on, based on a different climate than the one we are used to do. And those have different actions and different types of ways of looking at it. And then sometimes in some sectors they are very different. In the land use policies, so in agriculture and forestry, those two tend to be closely related. But there may also be cases where a good mitigation policy is actually bad for adaptation and vice versa. So we have to be normally careful when we are too much focused on emission reductions to make sure that we are not compromising the capacity to adapt, or if we are too much focused on resilience and all that, that we are not compromising the capacity of forests for sequestration. So as I said, in the context of mitigation, the question is very much what are the impacts of fires in emissions and sequestration? This seems like an obvious question because fires produce emissions. That's what I call their direct fire emissions. So that's the obvious and very visible component of fires. But there's also what I consider post-fire or indirect fire emissions, which is what happens after the fire and what are the consequences of that fire happening in terms of emissions and sequestration. So on the one hand, we will have dead trees that will continue to emit because they will decay. There will be losses in terms of soil erosion and soil carbon associated with fire. They do not necessarily happen during the fire, but they will happen. We saw some data this morning on this type of aspects. They will tend to show up a bit later. But there's also the impact in terms of losses in future sequestration potential. Part of it comes from what I call the reboot of the forest production cycle. So you have a forest production cycle where you plant today and you expect to harvest in 60 years. But then if you have a fire at 15, you may have to start from 0 again. And so if you have this a lot of times, it's pulling all the carbon stocks down, and that has an impact in terms of the sequestration potential for the future. There's the cases then more dramatic in terms of forest degradation and abandonment. So if you do not have very active forest owners, or if the forest owners get disencouraged because they have a lot of fires, then you will have forests with less and less carbon stocks because the trees die and they're not recovered as fast. You may have problems with invasive species, or you may have the loss of forest altogether and eventually sequence of fires leading to deforestation and conversion, for instance, to shrublands. And we see all these dynamics happening in Portugal. If you see the National Forest Inventory shows a very skewed age structure. We have a lot of very young forests and not so much of the very old. Part of that is because we have so many fires. We also see a lot of signs of forest degradation and abandonment in conversions from forests to shrublands and events like that. But then there's also, even when we do the right things, there's also emissions involved in that. So when we go and we try to actively replant and recover an area, we will have emissions associated with that. And so all this is, let's say, from the mitigation perspective, the types of things that we are worried about. From an adaptation perspective, we are looking at the prospect of having higher and more frequent fire intensities, probably more violent fires arising from the fact that we'll have more heat waves and those bomb conditions being together to make extreme fire events. But also because of drought, because of soil degradation, it might become more and more difficult to actually do post-fire recovery. So bringing back the trees after a fire may become more difficult if, for instance, you have very long and dry springs. It may be difficult for trees to survive. And so you may have to go back and back and back, and this may become harder in the future. So if we consider them together, as I said, forestry and agriculture is one of those cases where it makes sense to consider mitigation and adaptation together. There are a number of questions where climate policies and land use policies in general could have an influence. Again, I think there are different levels where we can consider them. There are probably more, but these were some that I thought would be interesting. At the landscape level, how do we organize the landscapes to make them more fire resilient and more fire resistant? And how do we, and since the landscape is one thing, but then you have the landowners that do not own the entire landscape, but they own fractions of the landscape. So how do we make these two come together? How do we make landowners to adopt the right land use for that particular part of the landscape? So that is a very tricky and difficult question, and one where I think policies could have an impact. Then if we zoom in at the management level, and then we come to the practices that we heard this morning of prescribed burning and so on.
Can you change to this one?
Yes. Is this off now? Yeah, okay. If we come to the forest management level, what are then the practices that we have at our disposal to make sure that we have the right amount of fuels, that we select the fuels we like and the fuels we don't like, and how do we manage that? Of course, there are then the dimensions of firefighting and education and training, which also have a very big influence. So how do we develop strategies to fight fires that are more efficient than the ones we have today? How do we learn from the fires that we have, and how do we evolve from that to make sure that we get more and more efficient in making sure that the fires don't get to that size where they are basically uncontrollable. On the education and training level, this is true for everyone in the chain, from the landowner all the way to the policy level. So this is what I think should be happening, what is actually happening in the Portuguese case. And again, I'm focusing only on the climate change policies. As I said in the beginning, there are specific forestry policies and specific firefighting policies and fire prevention policies. So I'm not going into those. I'm just focusing on the main instruments of climate policy. How do they talk about fires? And so the main instrument right now in terms of mitigation policy is the National Energy and Climate Plan for 2030. Every European member state has one. And basically the objective of this plan is to tell how the country intends to implement its emission reduction targets. It includes all sectors, and then it identifies measures for each of the sectors. So the ones that are mentioned that refer to fires, either directly or indirectly. There's one on biomass for energy, but this is a bit more indirect. But the ones that are more directly related, there's one specifically talking about forest fires, which is to include landscape resilience. Then there's this idea of developing payment programs for ecosystem services. We have been testing some pilots on these areas, and then to decrease risks and to do capacity building for fire components. On the adaptation perspective, we do have an action program for adaptation to climate change. And their fires are very much on the top of the agenda in this plan. And there's a number of lines of action, they're called lines of action here. And they're related to this. So the idea of the climate policies in Portugal, and I think in most countries, is that you identify these areas, but then the actual implementation will come from programs like the Common Agriculture Policy. So those are there's also structural funds applied for the environment. There we have the Portuguese Environment Fund. So all these programs should then develop specific actions to assist in implementing this. This may also lead to legislation changes where it's deemed necessary, but then those come down not to the coordination of the climate policy itself, but to the agencies that are more related to on-the-ground implementation in these different sectors. One last word, looking much further away to carbon neutrality by 2050. This idea of carbon neutrality came about when we had the Paris Agreement signed in, which talked about the need for the world to come to carbon neutrality by the second half of the century. And so most developed countries started looking at, but developed countries should have the lead on that. So the interpretation by most of the European countries was that we need to get to carbon neutrality by around 2050. And so there was this study looking at exploring this question. Is it possible for Portugal to reach carbon neutrality by 2050? Zero net emissions is not zero emissions. This is very important, is that whatever you get from emissions is equal to whatever you get from the land use sector in terms of sequestration. So it's a balance between the two, not necessarily zero emissions in all of society. And the result is summarized here. There's this infography that details a little bit what is happening in the energy sector, in agriculture and livestock management, on waste, on transport, so a number of sectors. There's information I can provide. I forgot to put that in the presentation, but I can provide it later if anyone is interested. But or if you look for Portugal Carbon Neutrality Roadmap, you also find it very easily on the internet. There's something. Tá aqui uma coisa na televisão. So not going into the details of all this, because that would be a presentation in itself and a long one, but let me just make a very quick summary of the conclusions. So the question was, is it possible? The answer is yes, but there is a number of ifs. And this is only possible if all sectors contribute. This doesn't mean that all sectors need to contribute by the same amount. So what we see, for instance, from this study is that electricity production will have to be 100% renewable, but you won't have cows that are zero emissions because of the biology of cows. So some reductions are possible and some are not. Some are more possible than others. And so the study takes that into consideration. What it does say is that the land use sector will need to be increased and enhanced to about 11 to 13 million tons of CO2 per year. If you remember one of my slides, we are at an average of about 4. So that means triple the amount of annual sequestration. So that's extremely demanding. And one of the things that is considered in that estimation is a substantial reduction of the annual burnt area by about 60%. Important note, this is a study looking at possibilities. It's not telling you how you get to these numbers. So it uses technologies that exist. It uses assumptions that are hopefully credible, but it does not say to get there you need this and that policy. So that was not part of the study. It was just a scoping to see, is it technically feasible to get to where we want to be? And again, the answer is yes, but it will be, for the land sector, it will be extremely demanding, because to get a reduction of about 60% in annual burnt area against the scenario where climate change is playing against us. So this is 2 times more difficult because of that. And the other conclusion related to fire is that post-fire management and recovery needs to improve. So today we have a lot of areas, as I said before, that after a fire may not undergo active recovery. So they just wait for trees to come back, if they come back, and sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. And so we will need to be more active in that type of post-fire management, and that was also integrated somehow in these simulations. And I think that's it from my side. Thank you very much.
Well, because Paulo will be part of our team of experts, you can pose your questions to Paulo now in the session that will now start. Thank you, Paulo. It was very, very interesting presentation. And I think it it launches the theme, so we can start with the questions for our experts. And what I think I will do is I will start with the first question, and then who wants to start? I could do in line, but I think that if somebody wants to start from one of our 5 experts, he will start. And we have 2 people online also. I forgot to say before that we are recording the online session, but we wrote it on the chat and nobody was against it. So this will be public. This will be available in the website of the project, and this session will be public, the event today. And what I feel like, just to start with the first question, is that so all this information, all this importance of the fire prevention to mitigate and to the greenhouse gas emissions, which go up and down, and it's mainly because of fires, as we saw in Portugal. So this is already thought in many policies, but how can we improve? How can we pass it into the programs? So I think this will lead us to the first question. And I will show the questions now. So we see that greenhouse gas emissions from wildfires, they are already, we can see them in many policies, at least in Portugal and in other countries too. And even in the book for the neutrality of carbon neutrality for 2050, we see that is accounted for. We can read the importance of the fire prevention, of managing fires, of lowering down the burned area. But so I pose the first question for our experts. So, but do you consider that the risk of greenhouse gas emissions from wildfires, is it adequately incorporated into planning, management and prevention at the national level? And I don't know who wants to start to discuss this question. Paulo, or Mercedes, or somebody online. We have our experts online. And Mercedes, do you want to present yourself quickly before starting, maybe?
Well, okay. First of all, I want to acknowledge to be here, representing the forest fire, the Spanish Society of Forest Science, and also to have the opportunity to meet colleagues with which we have been working for years and years. Professor Francisco Rego and Leonia Nunes. So after that, I'm a forest researcher, forest fire researcher at the INEA Forest Center, as Ricardo and Eduardo, but in another research group, but in the same center. And since July, I'm the president of the Sociedad Española de Ciencias Forestales, so it's an honor for me to be here. As I am a researcher, I don't know really the legislation at the level as you know, but as far as I know, the consideration of the emission of the risk of emission of forest fires is not really integrated in the or taking into account with this name in the prevention. Indirectly, it is because if you reduce if you made a good prevention, if you take into account this fuel management, you are reducing the risk of emission. But I was looking for this information in some documents in the MITECO, the Ministry of Transition Ecology, with the CLIF, that is the Committee of Fighting Against Forest Fire. It's a national level committee in Spain. They have several documents. One of them, for example, about prevention or about prescribed burning. And I can able to find the greenhouse gases, emission, risk reduction. This kind of work are not in this document. Indirectly, there are, because we are looking for reduce the area burn, so it's a way to reduce it, but this is not clearly right in this way.
Thank you, Mercedes. Somebody on the table wants to add something, Francisco or Paulo, or should I now ask? I see Mark Font. Hello? And Eduardo, who wants to? Mark? I don't know who wants to speak first, Mark or Eduardo?
As you wish.
Please, go ahead, please.
Okay. Good morning or afternoon. Do you hear me now? Yes? Okay.
Yes, very well.
Okay, it's a pleasure to be here in this final REMAS meeting and to see lots of colleagues. And I don't want to mention everybody, but for sure, Francisco Rego is a former European Forest Institute chair of the board and many other functions and inspiring researcher in many fields. It's a pleasure to meet you. I would have wished to be there in Lisbon, but this week is quite challenging. So I've been following the project that it is one of the projects in forest area that our universities engage, UPV in Valencia, and it was also very interesting to see the different presentations before. On these questions, I think it is basically the first and the second question for the roundtable that you have asked us to speak about. I would start mentioning that until now in the climate change process, forest fires have been considered as a force majeure. And in certain way, despite very important in the final balance of forests globally, have been like a black hole. Of course, we progressively in research know more details about the emissions and so on, but they have been really not totally integrated. And there is in the Mediterranean, we'll go down to the scale of the Mediterranean, that is at the end 1% of the global forest, so it's not a big share. It is obvious that adequately managed forests show quite positive differences to abandoned and non-managed forests in the final result of forest fires. And this, of course, includes as well agricultural managed land that may be in between and that may help. And there has been also strong research and all the process, and I want also to recall Francisco Rego with fire paradox, where you were as well, very key part of it, where different progress has been coming from the forest fire research community, especially with these so-called strategic management areas or zones. I just recall the Spanish word, which is zonas estratégicas de gestión, the relevance that fire is not linear or exponential, but has certain key parts where it may be stopped if the area is properly prepared, which hardly can be done in the moment of fire, has to be done before. And if that is not done, then fire spreads again exponentially to different parts. And at the end, there are kind of compartments where, of course, also the status of that forest can be worked on. But the first priority is, of course, to work on these strategic areas that are 2, 3, 4% of a forest area, and eventually, if possible, of course, on the fuel load available in the different compartments that, of course, will also define the capacity by the understanding that there is no technicity to trespass a certain threshold. I recall the images of for the Pedro Grau forest, where in the key hours, fire was about 10 times what the forest fire, any forest fire service can fight against. And this is not only an issue of efficiency, is also an issue of risk for people that are working there, that we need to find levels of fuel loads that can be suitable for firefighters, and we don't send them to an impossible task. So knowing all that, what we still need to work on is knowing much more in detail. I think this project, REMAS, has done an important contribution to get more information about these trade-offs, to get them out of this black hole of the force majeures between all the consequences, the economic ones and the non-economic ones, between the cost that these preventive measures would entail on one hand, and the benefits in reducing these CO2 emissions, while also considering other issues like water and so on. And in that sense, it's important that also from research results and modelization later on these research results, we are able to include here as well other factors, like, for example, blue and green water, erosion, bioeconomy, rural development, landscape values, or biodiversity. Despite there are many thinking that the best thing is not to do anything regarding biodiversity, just think about the montados portuguesos or the dehesas on the other side of the line. They are the most rich in biodiversity ecosystems of Europe, terrestrial ones, without humid lands. That is a different wetlands is a different area, and for sure they are managed. It's everything else than a totally natural forest. So it's important that we get all this information to be able to integrate all these factors in, and in that sense also to get what can be the priorities where the actions yield higher results. There would be most likely the strategic areas or zones, and then inside the forest patches where these actions can be more prioritary, or on the other hand, they may yield higher, be less costly, because these thinnings can be practically supporting the value of the operation, or 50% of the operation. And so we can work in a rational priority with existing resources as far as possible in reducing the risk. From the policy side, I would just recall that especially since the last 3 years, we have been surprised by the European Commission coming with lots of initiatives that are running exactly in the wrong direction of what we are speaking, enlarging the forest area without the concept of fires, forcing forest abandonment and more protection, putting difficulties for biomass use, carbon parking in the forest. So I think it's important that the forest fire perspective is brought forward in order to enlighten better the policies that we are seeing those days. Another critical issue, which is not an issue just in the EU, also national level, is the lack of integrations and consistency of our resources. It's practically impossible, I don't know in Portugal, but in Spain for sure, that if these actions are very positive for the water yield, just to put an example, the Ebro basin has lost half of the water. It is not reduction of precipitation. It is basically the enlargement of forests and the amount of fine elements that the forests hold that are the same that create the issue of fires. These are the same, only for fires they should be dead, and for water interception they can be also green, but it is the same. This has reduced half of the water of the Ebro, which is the most important river of the Iberian Peninsula in water yield. So there are really key issues that are very related, that they need very similar answers, reduction of these fine elements, but the policies of the water, the policies of carbon, and the policies of agricultural policy and fire repressions are totally disaggregated, happening in the same areas. And this is an important challenge, because frequently we don't have the resources, and imagine the lack of resources may be even more critical in Portugal, but the policies are scattered. This I cannot evaluate for Portugal, but for sure for Spain. And of course, there's a lack of operational mechanism for funding this sustainable forest resilient programs. Another aspect that needs both research and policy decision is on the area of tenure of environmental services. We have been able to work a lot on the tenure issue, and there has been a big agreement 10 years ago on the voluntary guidelines on tenure in the Committee on Food Security for agriculture, for forests, for fisheries, but there's no kind of international agreement or EU agreement or even national level on the tenure of environmental services. This creates a big mess where everybody is trying to do something, and we come to a quite crazy situation. For example, the additionality principle, in which only what you are able to do more than expected is really honored. And if you are not able to do it, you are even having you have even to pay for not having been able to increase your stock expenses. So it's like if in your work, someone would only start paying you a salary when you're able to increase above the increase of productivity schedule for the next year. The rest of the time you have been working for free. This is really a free riding issue. It's happening with water as well. And there are many of these kind of very unclear situations. It's true that at the developing side of climate change, RED+ is working positively for the finance minister of the country. It's not very clear that this drops down to the communities and the field, which is what really is needed. But there is really a big gap on the issue of environmental services. It's an issue of specific agronomists, foresters, or environmental economics, but very especially a legal issue that has to be tackled. And very strongly, of course, this principle of additionality that creates this problem, and that forest management is not accounted as a way to reduce emissions, despite this recognized by the convention, but not by the EU till now. And this creates a big gap of financing. It is recognized, but at the end, it turns back as a challenge for forest management instead as an opportunity, as it should be. So there are, I think, important challenges ahead in policy in order to be able to move in the right direction that has been explained very good by our predecessor speakers. So thanks a lot, and I look forward to the further discussions today.
Thank you, Eduardo. I will pass to Mark. If Mark wants to add also something.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I would like to say that in the case of Andorra, it's quite different regarding Spain, Portugal, or France. And this is because Andorra is a very little country placed in the middle of the Pyrenees mountains. And we are not only a mountain country, we are a forest country with 40% of the surface covered with forest, but we are not a fire-prone area. So this is why our policies did not touch this issue until now, or at least until we signed the Paris Agreement on 2015. Since there, the government has worked a lot on this sense. This means we have approved the first climate change law and our first biodiversity and landscape law, which recognize the forest as the main support to mitigate the climate change impact. But until now, we did not recognize officially the role of the forest in the sense of the risk of greenhouse gas emissions due to forest fires. So we have a lot of work to do in this sense, and that's why we think we need to be part of this kind of projects like REMAS to learn of your experience, of your knowledge, and to be able to well adapt our legislation, but also our technicians in the sense to be more adapted and perform the mitigations on climate change.
Thank you, Mark, for your intervention. I don't know if there's somebody on the online public that wants to add something to this question. How we can, I think we already passed a little bit out of this question, but so because it's normal because this is such a wide subject that it touches many other. It's transversal, so it's normal to happen. I don't know if anybody wants to add online, if there's any questions. Or here in the room? No? So I will continue with the other questions. And, okay. I see Francisco wants to... No, Francisco.
Well, thank you, Eduardo, and it's also a big pleasure to see you again. In FAO last time and all in other circumstances, and Mercedes also a great pleasure, and several years of working together. It's very good. Well, I think in general, I don't know if I'm respecting the order of the questions, but I think in general, I think we are in a stage where the recognition of the problem is clear, and that covers the European policies, the national policies, and so there is the recognition of there is a recognition of the problem. There is also recognition that the problem is complex, and then it requires, I think, some simplification in order to be understood by general public and especially by politicians if you want it to be operational. So there is this kind of transfer or simplification that cannot be oversimplification, but it has to be simplified in order for the language to be used by the decision makers. And then you go to the policies and the plans, and some of them already refer the problems. But then if you don't have, let's say, very let's say a framework where you can go from the concern to the funding and the financial assistance, then you are not making, you cannot make the difference. And I think that's the gap. That's I think the more difficult gap, because without that, then you cannot have, let's say, things changing in the field. So I think that's why I think REMAS can do this contribution on having a way to quantify the emission risk. And I think that's I think a very important point. But I think the other step now would be to transfer that language to the language that is understandable at the policy level. And I don't think that that's an easy one, but that's I think the next move. I would like also to challenge a little bit the other experts, Paulo and Mercedes and Eduardo, Mark, and Wanda, because I have been working lately on a concept that possibly part of the global warming that we are seeing is probably not directly related to the greenhouse gases, but on the direct heat from combustion, fossil fuel combustion, and especially on fires. It's very visible that during a fire and after a fire, you have a large portion of the air that is heated, and that fraction is not captured in the IPCC or in the other frameworks. But I think it's directly correlated with greenhouse gas emissions. If you know what the emissions are, you know how many joules are released to the atmosphere. So I think that would be also a very interesting component, or some another movement to try to understand the role of fires in global warming. That is not going directly, it's not going indirectly through the greenhouse gases, but it goes directly through the emission of heat to the atmosphere. And from my perspective, and that's the challenge that I wanted to see, today and yesterday with the world news were about fusion. How you can create energy from basically nothing, from atoms. And then the idea is that with nuclear energy or with fusion, we'll have all the energy problems solved because they are carbon neutral. And what I believe is that the energy that is released by fires, for instance, of course, they are releasing carbon, they are releasing CO2, but they are releasing energy, heat to the atmosphere directly. So I think it's important to recognize that energy is probably something that is going to capture the world's attention in the next few years. And if we put this concern about greenhouse gases together with the energy discussion, I think we could make let's say, use the opportunity to have a better integration of forest management and land use planning in the policies. But that's only a reflection, possibly to create a little bit more entropy than necessary. But anyway, it would be my reflection to push for the discussion in this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Francisco. It's a good take-home message and reflection. And if maybe anybody that wants to include that in the discussion now, is welcome. And I think I can continue with the second question. We already approached it a little bit. Eduardo approached it a little bit too. And this is now we looked at how we thought that if the emission risk was well integrated or not into the planning and legislation. And we don't think it is. So as we've seen here. And how can we use now REMAS results, what we have been doing in the project for these years? For example, the action protocol, this transnational plan for the risk incorporation, how can it be used to improve public policies? And how could this risk be managed at an international level, for example? And as a result of this, what are the knowledge gaps or future steps, which were already approached a little bit by Eduardo, but I think we can continue. No, esta. So you all can you see online the questions? Paulo, do you want to start maybe?
Okay, thank you. I guess you can always do, as Francisco was also pointing out before, that one thing is the policies, a different dimension is how deep and how well you can implement the policies. So in that respect, I think it's fair to say that you can always do more and do better. And so it's good to always be humble enough to know that whatever we have at each particular moment can always be improved. In that respect, I think projects like this one do provide opportunities for revisiting some of the things that we normally do in a certain manner, and so to reflect upon how we could eventually do things differently. I see this very much spinning into forest policies. We do have regional programs, regional plans looking at prevention of forest fires. Those could be those could eventually benefit from this type of frameworks that were developed in the project. Also the results in terms of monitoring and capacity to make better estimations of the emissions associated with fires. Those are also always very welcome, because as I pointed out, the estimation system is very much based on averages and assumptions and so on. So everything that can bring density and approximations to reality is always welcome. I think one of the reasons I wanted to show you the equations and the process we use in terms of estimation was also a bit of outreach towards the scientific community to help us producing information in a way that we can use it, because that's always a challenge, because quite often you see projects that are capable of developing something extremely good, but then it's only usable in a very specific context. And since we have to do national level calculations, we need something that is usable in that sense. So that was also one of the reasons to bring that perspective to this meeting and to this room. But I think I'm encouraged by the results of the project in terms of the possibilities for it being used. I think it would be maybe useful to make specific outreach towards the entities that are more related to forest management and fire, the fire agency, for instance, that to make sure that in those more specific policy bodies that they know about the project and that they know about the results of the project.
Mercedes, do you want to add something?
Well, from policies, I don't have the knowledge to. Yeah,
I don't have the, oh, no? Thank you. Better? Yeah. Yes, I think it's more or less the same. I don't have the knowledge from the policy's point of view, but I think the importance of the presentation, I see this morning in the session, the previous session, is to point out some topics that need to be improved. In the knowledge needs to be improved using by the research. So in this way, this will be the importance of REMAS results to put this point in the research national plans or European plans, to include them in this in the objective for the research at national and European level, to have this information and to use them for policies and for management and for fire management and forest management.
Thank you. Yeah, yes, and also, hello? Can you hear me? It's in the hello? Oh. Also to improve, like Paulo said, to improve sea accounting at national level, for example, because there's so many biases, so many data that we don't have, and the REMAS it's a small step, but it's a small step to improve data, to see how we can get data that we need to really account, to better estimate the sea emissions from forest fires in our particular case. And I will ask now if Mark or Eduardo want to add to this question. So I will resume again the question. So it's the how do you think that the results of REMAS can improve the public policies, and how can this emission risk be managed at an international level, and to point out also knowledge gaps or future steps to better manage this risk?
Yeah. Mark,
Well,
you start?
Yes, if you don't mind.
Please, go ahead.
Thank you. In our case, I think it's crucial to mention that the project REMAS has served to talk to our politicians about the importance to make progress on this sense. And this means that thanks to this project and other initiatives, we are now ongoing the first national forest inventory, which can seem quite late to do so, but until the date, nobody thought to do this work. So thanks a lot to REMAS, thanks a lot for all these operational tools that will give us further arguments to talk with our politicians and to justify the need to improve the knowledge and the tools for this decision making regarding the public forest management and budget allocation. Also, we understand that it is totally crucial to address the issue of forest fires, even talking about firefighting or even talking about greenhouses emission at the transnational scale. And this is especially important when facing larger extreme wildfires, able to impact different regions, as fire doesn't understand of national borders. In this sense, we need harmonizing methods for risk incorporation across neighbor regions, and with the aim to prepare the landscape to well coordinate firefighter resources, and also to design the recovery stage according to this larger wildfire. Thank you.
Okay, I think on one hand, I think this modelization that was presented before by Vicky is quite interesting, and by other speakers. I think it was at the very beginning today as well. Another colleague from Portugal presented this as well. If we're able to know the hazard variable, the frequency of forest fires, especially of intensive forest fires on one hand, so we know what's all the critical areas, and we overlap it with the available fuel load, this is already a very important information that that we can have relatively soon in many areas. I think the basic focus for operational planning has to be something like the massif, what the French call the massif, something around 100 to 300,000 hectares. In Spain, we have an instrument in the forest law called the PORF, the Plan de Ordenación de los Recursos Forestales. As this cannot be done at the state level, well, the Russians can do it in their state because everything of the state, but in the rest of Europe, we have too complex ownership level and too small holding for that. It cannot be done really at country level or regional level, comunidades autónomas, French regions. That is still too strategic. It has to be more an operational level. And at that level, from that information basis, the available fuel loads, as you know, big, thick trees do not burn. It burns the fine elements. On the other hand, the hazard, the frequency, and the intensity. And there, such kind of projects can help to exchange experience, to fine-tune the research needed, and to get it more and more tuned and with the same methodologies and so on. Then the next step important is this planning at that level. Which techniques are the most suited to reduce that load and yield the highest result by changing the fuel structure? In some cases, recovering agriculture, in some cases, doing thinnings, pre-commercial thinnings, pruning, debrushing, or combination of factors. And then a lot as an instrument for the public services, especially the fire prevention service, forest service, to act in a priority sense, investing where the yield in reductions of the CO2 emissions are the highest. This would be the most logical issue. There may be areas that are very strategic and others where the investment might be much lower. And having by this a planning that ensures that each €1,000,000 that is invested yields the highest results possible and not just spread around without an efficient result, which was the situation until now, that there was just the expertise of the forest colleague that planned the operations. There was no kind of instrument that would inform, no, you have to do first this. In the area, you have about 20 strategic zones. Those are priority, and you have to work the first years this and the latest years these others. And when you start working on each of these patches, this patch compared, including the cost, is the more efficient one, and that is the next one, and so on. And even the alignment geographically, because there may be some that are much more efficient, but if you don't do the next one, then there is no efficiency. So this has to be an operational plan on the ground. Otherwise, it will not be able to deliver the results. And I see more the transnational in the sense of managing the big fire risk. This is another discussion. So we will have to do for sure. And there have been lots of fires going between Portugal and Spain, or between France and Spain. And let's hope Andorra is safe. But this is another issue of immediate operation. I think the exchange of the research, the guided research result to get the right the right proportions, the right relations, and fine-tuning them, and these modulations that help the decision maker to really say, I have now 3 million of next generation for the next 2 years. Where in this area can I invest it much better? And what are the further priorities for the next time? So that is really a change of decision, not just a single shot one.
Thank you, Eduardo. Oops, it's not this one. Hello? Thank you. No? Now I hear. Thank you, Mark and Eduardo. I am doing, while you talk, I'll try to do a small wrap up so we can discuss in the end, and you can correct me if necessary. I will go to the final question, and then we can open the discussion to everybody who wants to participate in the online or here in presence. So, as it was presented by Ricardo, our last presentation before Rebecca, we prepared in REMAS a memorandum of understanding, so that could be an intention of different entities and organizations to integrate the risk of greenhouse gas emissions from wildfires into the national and transnational planning and legislation. So this guides me to the last question. Thank you, Paulo. So, as I said before, we prepared the Memorandum of Understanding in REMAS project for the inclusion of the emission risk at a transnational level. So for this, I have 3 small questions. How relevant do you think that this initiative is? And which organizations or entities do you think would be more relevant, more important to join this memorandum? And what is the importance of joining now? Which is this last question is, of course, a bit redundant because we already discussed it, but this is my final questions for you. I don't know if Paulo wants to start or I pass to Mercedes.
If I understood correctly, the intention of the memorandum is to reach out to those institutions that are more close to on the ground management of these risks and of forest management. So I think in that respect, it would be useful and interesting to outreach to them directly. I am currently working for a research organization, so I don't see myself directly, and I'm not mandated to sign anything. But of course, I can bring any questions you want to the right people. But I do think it's relevant, and I think it would be useful to do specific outreach and specific targeting to those. Maybe try to arrange bilateral meetings with those organizations that are closer to that, to explain better what the objectives of the memorandum are, and try to get them on board. Regardless of they signing or not the memorandum, I think it's important that they are aware of the results of the project and that they are able to consider them in the work that they do. Yeah, that would be my take on this. Thank you.
Okay, concerning the relevance of this memorandum, I think it's very relevant. I think the presentation of Ricardo was very clear, and I think it's a very important document and a very important result of the project. Concerning the institution that need to see in this memorandum, I think all the institutions you mentioned at regional, local, national, and international level. I don't know what is the possibility for a Interreg project to reach this compromise from the agent, but I think this is a project supported by Europe, so I think this is a wait for the results. So I think this is important. And concerning the join this memorandum now, I think it is also important because it's a problem that we can wait we have no time for wait for reduce the emission of greenhouse gases.
Thank you, Mercedes. Professor Francisco. Thank you, Mercedes. Now, Professor Francisco can.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, just to continue some reflection, I also think the Memorandum of Understanding is one of those instruments to try to make it more operational, to go from the results to the field. And so because of that, I think it's a quite interesting tool to go from science to management. But I was wondering here another two reflections. One is the one I would say it's kind of the research trap. I think that's the research trap is something that happens in all projects, and I've been involved in many. So the research trap is when you end a project, you generally say, well, there is much more research needed, and we need other projects to continue. Well, that's an important message for the funding agencies of those, but it also gives the politicians and decision makers the idea that there is nothing to apply yet, that there is nothing that we can conclude from your research, and then they have kind of an argument for not doing the right thing. So I think the idea of in the research to have some kind of operational tools to make it more complete and more useful, I think it's a very important point. And as I was listening, I was also wondering if, let's say, when you have a memorandum of understanding, you have a memorandum between institutions. And I was wondering if it would be practical or a good way to go to use the certification procedures and the certification agencies like FSC or any of the others to adopt these kind of instruments in their certificates, because that could be, let's say, they are already working on sustainable forest management as a tool, and they have the connections with the owners and the managers of the areas, so to have the certificate, they take some advantage of that. So I think it could be a good dimension to try to incorporate these kind of guidelines and good practices in the certification processes. I don't think that we discussed that, but it's something that when you look at the memorandum of understanding, it could be, I think, a good possibility to get the non-governmental organizations and these agencies that are interested in promoting sustainable forest management involved in the process by, let's say, integrating some of the more operational aspects of the project. And also, I think from my perspective, one of the interesting things of the project is that it introduces also some kind of time dimension to the system, because when you look at the accounting of the emissions, it's quite static. Let's say, you know that those fires probably produce these kind of emissions, but you don't know anything about the recovery time of the different forest types. That's a dimension that is not included, and it's included in the emission risk. You don't acknowledge the types of fires also, if it's a prescribed fire, if it is a wildfire, the severity of the fire. So that is also a dimension that could be brought by this kind of approach. So there are some small complexities that could be introduced in the system, but to make it more realistic and also maintaining some operational perspective, and especially because of the dynamic nature and the modeling approach. Because one thing is to try to identify how much carbon, how much greenhouse gases are emitted. But the other thing is how the ecosystems and landscapes are reacting to that. And that is something that I think this kind of project and this approach brings as a new dimension to this discussion. And I think the memorandum of understanding is one tool that you can integrate these kind of concerns in the forest practice. So those were my reflections at this point.
Thank you, Francisco. Very interesting also to acknowledge how REMAS results add to the importance of this ecosystem resilience and recovery and the dynamic nature of carbon emissions and fires. I will get back to that in the end. Now I will pass to Eduardo and Mark.
Yes, I'm not being engaged in this project in detail, but there's a risk by using this transnational, first, that you confuse that the approach would be regarding to combating these fires if they are happening. This is another issue. And this issue of transnational pollution is for specific sources, but CO2 is emitted and sequestered all over the world. So I would more see the aim of this MOU in first ensuring that all this effort doesn't collapse. On the contrary, it takes up all these improvement issues that have been identified, and just Francisco commented a very interesting one that I think was still not taken into account. The project had a time limitation and a resource limitation, and the aim would be by sharing the same challenge in a relatively similar ecosystem like the Mediterranean forests, that is very specific at European and global scale, that the key actors work together, both from research and practice, to get the best modulation possible for a priority action in strengthening the resilience against forest fires of the forest. If they can incorporate other issues like water, like resilience against insects and droughts, that's perfect. This is, like we say in Spanish, more sugar, more sweeter. But at least regarding forest fires, to have really the optimal science-based tools to work in a rational prioritization exercise to reduce the risk of forest fires. And this is much logical that to do it at national level, that to do it together. All these areas, they share more or less the same climate and challenges, and they share their scientific skills, and they check it in different sub-ecosystems in the different countries and fine-tune the process, incorporate new elements. I think there is the value added, and the partners at the end have to be, on one hand, those related to forest prevention, eventually also forest firefighting. Sometimes they're the same, sometimes not. The forest services, in some countries, all is together. In some, it is divided in 2 or 3 pieces. The key actors at country level of the 4 or 5 countries that may share this endeavor. And on the other hand, the researchers and the IT people that are able to modulate, to establish a good modelization with the sound research that is identified together by scientists and practitioners. I think this would be, my humble view, the right construction, the interesting MOU that would provide especially the long-term perspective and sharing the same methodologies and the same approach that are progressively fine-tuned. Not very different as far as Europe has done for indicators for sustainable forestry that have been reviewed several times internationally, and at the end, they're accepted as the most solid ones that we have in Europe. So I think it's a replication on the specific issue of how we can increase the forest fire resilience of our forest in that ecosystem of the Mediterranean forest in a consistent scientific based and agreed perspective between the different targeted countries.
Thank you, Eduardo. Mark?
Thank you. In our case, we are going to present the memorandum in the Office of Climate Change and Energy of the government, and we think also interesting to present at all the municipalities which are the forest owners of 90% of the country. And okay, we are going to do this, and let's see. We hope and we feel that they will sign the memorandum without problems. But another thing will be how to translate translate the memorandum in practice and in order to take action. We will need to finish, first of all, the first forest inventory to get precise data, to get a lot of information. And then when preparing the forest management plans, could be really interesting to add as a new layer the gas emission risk into this forest plan. So we are now on the theoretical dimension, and this is, I think, it's a good opportunity for us to try to be more efficient and learning from you, from large experienced countries in forest fire, in forest management. So we will keep looking on your experience and on your trajectory. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you all. I would like to ask if anybody wants to comment on this discussion from the audience here. Vicky or anybody from the partners, from the public? No? Or online, do we have online questions? No? Well, I can show now what I was doing some wrap-up notes. I will show it to you and you can comment on that or correct me. And I think some more colleagues have some notes if you want to add, Ines. So I'll show you my notes, which are very summed up, but I thank you everybody for all the discussion here. It was very interesting, and I think this has been discussed over and over again because all these different policies and all these different management and the ecosystem aspects, they are all together, they are all related, and so fires are a part of it, and it's important to talk about that. So I will now show my notes and then we can discuss a little bit more. Can you see my screen? See? So about the emission risk, we discussed here that although this the fire prevention importance for mitigating greenhouse gases, and it's included in many policies in Portugal and other countries, the emission risk itself is not well integrated into planning and legislation. So about forest management and fire prevention, it is important to identify priority actions and hotspots for intervention, to have optimal investment and an optimal operational efficacy. Forest management is not well accounted in order to reduce emissions, so this is a big gap for C accounting. And of course, we already know this for many other issues, that we have land ownership in Europe it halts management. It's very difficult to manage when we have many different properties, small property and private property. But we already know this. This is also a problem for forest management and other types of land uses. In terms of policies, it's important that I remember Edward referred that we need to integrate different policies, not just fire policies, but also water policies, carbon policies. Though this should be all in a holistic policy, but this is, I acknowledge the difficulty of this. Of course, take policies intentions into action plans. This is what we are discussing here. There's also a lack of European Union agreement on ecosystem services. In terms of REMAS results, so all the indicators, all the estimation model that we use and different assessments may improve and will improve carbon estimation and carbon accounting at the national level and also at the transnational level. REMAS results also show the importance of forest inventory methodologies and to have consistent methodologies, not only at the national level, but also across Europe. If in Portugal, for example, we have we have a forest, a national inventory, which is so important to assess all these, to estimate carbon and other forest variables that we need to have a good, reliable accountant of carbon emissions. And this is not consistent throughout the years in Portugal. I think you have the same problem in Spain. We don't have the same grid of plots across the years. This is being improved, but it's not good enough yet. So this is a big problem. So in our project, we also acknowledge the importance of prescribed fires, which is still a big issue in Portugal, and I think in Europe too. Fire severity, it's an important indicator, and it should be used to improve the carbon emission estimation. And as Francisco said, and I thought it's a very important take-home message, we have to take into account the importance of the dynamic nature of fires, of carbon emissions, like carbon dynamics, and of ecosystem recovery and resilience. This is all very important, and this is dynamic, and it's not easy to assess. This is a complex quantification. At a transnational level, so we have to incorporate this emission risk, especially when we consider that there is more and more extreme wildfire events in Europe. And again, we have to use consistent methodologies across European Union. For example, forest inventory, and Mark was saying that they're doing their first forest inventory in Andorra, correct? And so it's important that you start using this consistent methodology so that you can monitor the forests for a long time, using always the same methodology.
We are doing in this way.
Can you say again, Mark?
Sorry, we are doing in this way.
Good. This is what Portugal should do also, but I don't think it's not doing it yet. All right. I see the faces of Paulo and Francisco. And in terms of the memorandum of understanding, so it was an important initiative. Of course, it's not binding, but it's important. It's an intention, so it's important to start. So you discussed and you proposed that it's important to operationalize the research and link it to administration and planning and legislation. So not to have research in one side and we have the administration on the other side, and then they don't communicate. So memorandum of understanding will improve this communication. And Francisco also proposed, and this is also very interesting, that we should include these NGOs entities in the memorandum of understanding, because using these entities, the certification procedures, it may facilitate the inclusion of the risk of emission and may facilitate the operationalization of all these procedures of the risk estimation. And I don't know if you want to add to what I just said.
Eventually, in item 2, the integration not only of policies but also of funding.
Sorry, Eduardo, can you repeat, please?
Yes, not in item 2 policies, not only the integration of policies but as well of funding. In many cases,
yes,
if integrating, you may reach the threshold for a significant effect, but by splitting it in different sources, acting in the same areas with similar results, may bring not a consistent result in efficiency. And this is what we lack. In our case, water is federal, agriculture and forest regional, the part of funding is from the EU, and these kind of things create a very fragmented action. The policy can be nice, but then the actions are separate.
Yes, thank you, Eduardo. I already added that, and that is very important. That is transversal, not just to fire policy, but to all policies. No. sometimes the funding it's not complementary, and we are wasting money in different things, and we should channel it to optimize it. So do we have any questions from the audience or from online? I think everybody wants to go for lunch, and it's not raining. I don't know if you know in online people, but we had big floods yesterday in Lisbon, heavy rains and big floods. So not forest fires. Now we are in the floods season. So I will pass now to Francisco.
No, just before finishing, just to acknowledge the interest of the session from my side, but also the pleasure that I had to work with the partners of the project and with the team that is not very visible today, with Leonia, Inês, Erika, Yasin, also Mario now, but well, it was a big pleasure, and also to indicate that the coordination, and Rebecca and Vicky, well, thank you very much for my perspective, for your excellent work and patience and in effort in coordinating, which is always a difficult task. So I didn't want to leave the floor without having these words of appreciation to not only the panel here, but the team that was able to put it together.
I thank everybody. Welcome. Rebecca, do you want to say something to finish the session? Should I finish now? Do you want? I think we are about to finish.
Yes, thank you again to ISA for the organization of the final event. Also, thank you for all speakers from the president. It was the how is the name? Well, okay, thank you for.
We thank Nuno Cortes. He's not here now, but he's the president of the school assembly of ISA, and he welcomed everybody in representation of ISA.
Thank you for all the speakers, to Paulo, to also to Francisco, Banda, Yasin Benalima, Victoria Lerma, and Stephanie Jalabert, and Ricardo Ruiz Peinado, and Mercedes Guijarro also, Mark Font, and Eduardo Rojas, that you have been here in the participating actively in the event. And also thank you to all the people that are here that also has work, but they don't have made an intervention. So thank you for all the team. As I say at the start of the meeting, the coordination of the project is not possible if we don't have an engaged team. So thank you, because the role of each person, of each entity has been key for the result of the REMAS project. And we hope to continue working on improving our results, because there's no, I think there is not the end of the REMAS project, if not the start of more studies linked with emission risk. So thank you also, Vicky and Victoria, for the support of the scientific technical coordinator. And well, thank you so much for that magnificent close of the event. Thank you.
Well, I will then close the session. Thank you, Mark and Eduardo. Thank you, Mercedes, Paulo, Francisco. Thank you, everybody, for your participation in presence and online. And so we will have all the information available from the project in the project website, and anything that you want to share or discuss, we are all available. And thank you so much. for your interest.
Yes. Thank you also for the technical support and also for the communication support. I forgot it, sorry. So thank you for all that you have made possible, also the technical part and the communication part. Thank you. Okay, and before going live, we are make a picture with all the team, REMAS team. No, I think here we can do it. And also remind that I said before that we are going to record some videos before going lunch. So we have time because we have finished before the time. So we make the photo and after one representative of each entity, and also if you want as external expert participate in the video, you can do it, and
It's about the lunch. It's nice now. It's not raining, but